The morning sun crested over the eastern ridge, bathing Daniel's farmstead in golden light. He wiped sweat from his brow as he stepped back from the retrofitted tractor engine, admiring his handiwork. The machine hummed with new life, fusion coils pulsing beneath its weathered exterior. This blend of old-world machinery and cutting-edge technology defined life on new Terran colonies, particularly this agricultural outpost on Hestia. Daniel Matthews was a mechanical engineer by training and a farmer by circumstance. When the Free Alliance had opened Hestia for settlement 5 years ago, he jumped at the opportunity to build something of his own, away from the corporate megacities that dominated Earth and the inner colonies. His workshop sat at the edge of his property, a repurposed barn filled with tools both ancient and futuristic. The smell of machine oil mingling with freshly turned soil from the fields beyond. "Diagnostic complete," announced the workshop's AI assistant. Engine efficiency increased by 27%. "Not bad for morning's work," Daniel said, reaching for a rag to clean his hands. At 32, he had the weathered look of someone who spent equal time under the sun and under machinery. His calloused hands and the smile lines around his eyes spoke of a life balanced between hard work and satisfaction. The tranquility of the moment was interrupted by a high-pitched whine from outside. Daniel recognized the sound immediately, a gravitational drive decelerating. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the sunlight to spot the sleek silver craft that descended toward his landing pad. The vessel was unmistakably Zoraxian in design, organic curves and flowing lines that somehow managed to appear both elegant and predatory. Daniel smiled. Only one Zoraxian ever visited him without prior notice. "Zorak," he murmured, wiping his hands on his coveralls before walking toward the landing pad. The ship settled with barely a whisper, its landing struts extending like the legs of some enormous insect. A moment later, a section of the hull seemed to melt away, revealing a tall, slender figure. Zorak stood nearly 7 feet tall, with iridescent blue-green skin that shifted colors subtly with each movement. His 4 arms were held loosely at his sides, and his large, multifaceted eyes glittered as they adjusted to the sunlight. The breathing apparatus around his mouth, necessary for processing Earth-normal atmospheres, clicked softly as he spotted Daniel. "Daniel, friend!" The translator at Zorak's throat converted his native clicks and whistles into English. "A most fortuitous day for a visitation, yes?" Daniel grinned, approaching his alien friend with extended hand. They had met 3 years ago at an interplanetary trade conference, where Daniel had been seeking parts for his machinery, and Zorak had been representing Zoraxian mining interests. An unlikely friendship had formed between the human engineer and the alien businessman. "Always good to see you, Zorak. What brings you to my corner of the galaxy? Business on Hestia?" Zorak made a gesture that Daniel had come to recognize as their equivalent of a smile, a rippling motion across the facial membrane. "Both business and pleasure. As your kind says, the pleasure is seeing my friend. The business." He paused, his colors shifting to a deeper blue. "I bring a gift, a significant one, to honor our bond of friendship." Daniel's eyebrows rose. Zoraxian gifts were often extravagant. Their culture placed enormous emphasis on gift-giving as a measure of relationship importance. Last time, Zorak had brought him a self-repairing tool set that had revolutionized his workshop efficiency. "You didn't have to bring anything," Daniel said, the obligatory response in such exchanges. "But I wish to," Zorak replied, the expected counter. He gestured toward his ship with one of his upper arms. "Come, see what I have brought for Daniel friend." They approached the vessel together, and Zorak touched a pattern on the hull. Another section dissolved away, revealing the cargo bay. Daniel peered inside, expecting perhaps machinery or exotic materials. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. A young woman knelt on the floor of the cargo bay, head bowed, She wore nothing but a simple metallic collar around her neck. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent, with a faint lavender undertone that marked her as non-human, though her form was humanoid. Long, silver-white hair cascaded down her back, partially obscuring her face. "What?" Daniel began, his voice failing him. Zorak's colors brightened to an almost joyful yellow. "A bioservant, one of the finest from the breeding facilities of Capella. Expensive, yes, but for Daniel friend, only the best." He clicked in what sounded like pride. "She is called Lyra, fully programmed for all domestic and personal services. Highly intelligent but completely obedient. No need for punishment. Her genetic coding ensures compliance." Daniel stared, unable to process what he was seeing. A slave. His friend had brought him a slave as a gift. "Zorak. He struggled to find words that wouldn't cause a diplomatic incident. "On Earth and human colonies, we don't keep sentient beings as property." Zorak's colors shifted to a confused purple. "But she is not sentient as you understand it. She is bioengineered, created for purpose. A tool with a brain, yes? Like your AI assistants, but with physical form." He gestured dismissively. "Many humans in the Outer Rim colonies purchase such servants. I checked regulations. No laws against bioproperty on Hestia, as it falls under free alliance trade agreements." Daniel's mind raced. Zorak was technically correct. The newer, more distant colonies operated under looser regulations, and the Free Alliance had notoriously permissive trade laws. The Zoraxians, despite their advanced technology, had a culture that still embraced concepts like indentured servitude and bioengineering for service. The young woman, Lyra, had not moved or spoken. She remained kneeling, eyes downcast, seemingly untroubled by her nakedness or her status as a gift. "Demonstrate," Zorak commanded, and immediately Lyra rose to her feet with fluid grace. "This unit is designated Lyra, Bioform Class Epsilon 7, programmed for domestic service and companionship," she said in a soft, melodious voice. Her eyes, a startling violet, remained focused on the floor. "This unit is pleased to serve its new owner." Daniel felt sick. The practiced words, delivered without emotion, reminded him of the worst historical accounts of human slavery from Earth's past. Yet, this was somehow worse. A being created specifically for servitude, programmed at the genetic level to accept her status. "Zorak, I appreciate the thought behind your gift," Daniel said carefully. "But I cannot accept a sentient being as property. It goes against everything I believe." Zorak's colors darkened with concern. "You reject my gift? This would be a grave insult in my culture, Daniel friend." Daniel found himself caught in an impossible situation. To reject the gift would damage, perhaps irreparably, his friendship with Zorak and potentially create diplomatic problems between humans and Zoraxians in the sector. To accept would be to participate in what he considered an abhorrent practice. But as he looked at Lyra, standing motionless and vulnerable, he realized there was a third option, one that might be the only moral choice. "I accept your generous gift," Daniel said slowly, the words bitter in his mouth. "Thank you, Zorak." The alien's colors immediately brightened. "Excellent. She will serve you well. Her programming includes household management, food preparation, personal care, and physical companionship if desired." He made a dismissive gesture with his lower arms. "A simple command activates whatever function you require." Daniel nodded stiffly, unable to look at either Zorak or Lyra. "Come," he said to the woman, turning toward his house. "Follow me." "Yes, master," she replied, and the word made Daniel wince. They walked in silence to Daniel's modest home, a two-story structure built of local timber and smart materials. Behind them, Zorak called out that he would return in a few days to see how Daniel was enjoying his gift, before his ship hummed to life and rose into the sky. Once inside, Daniel turned to face Lyra, who stood with hands clasped before her, eyes still downcast. "Look at me," he said quietly. She raised her head, violet eyes meeting his. There was no fear in her gaze, no shame at her nakedness, no resentment at her status, and somehow that was the most disturbing thing of all. Whatever had been done to create her had stripped away the most basic instincts of personhood. "My name is Daniel Matthews. I want you to understand something important," he said firmly. "I don't believe in ownership of sentient beings. I only accepted you to get you away from that ship and that situation. You are not my property." Lyra's expression remained placid. This unit understands that Master Daniel is expressing a philosophical position. However, this unit's purpose is to serve. This unit cannot function without an owner. Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're not a unit. You're a person. Your name is Lyra, right? Just Lyra." "Designation accepted. This unit will respond to Lyra." He sighed. This was going to be more complicated than he'd hoped. "Wait here," he said, and went upstairs to his bedroom. He returned a moment later with a set of clothes, a simple shirt and pants that would be too large for her, but better than nothing. "Here," he said, holding them out. "Put these on." Lyra looked at the clothes, then back at Daniel, the first hint of confusion crossing her features. "Is Master Daniel displeased with this unit's appearance?" "No, it's not that. It's—" How could he explain concepts like dignity and autonomy to someone engineered not to value them? "It's cold in here, and people wear clothes. It's what we do." She accepted the garments without further question, slipping the shirt over her head. It hung to her mid-thigh, the sleeves extending past her fingertips. The pants were even more oversized, but she rolled up the cuffs with surprising dexterity. Something shifted in her expression as she adjusted the clothing, something subtle but unmistakable. She ran her fingers over the fabric with what almost looked like curiosity. "These are Master Daniel's clothes," she observed. "Just Daniel. And yes, they are. We'll get you your own soon, but these will do for now." Lyra nodded, and for a brief moment, Daniel thought he saw something like gratitude flicker across her face. "You must be hungry," he said, changing the subject. "Let me show you the kitchen, and we can have some lunch." "This unit can prepare food for Master. For Daniel," she offered. "No, that's okay. I'll make us something simple. You can—" He trailed off, unsure what to suggest. What did you tell a person who had been created solely to serve others? "You can sit and rest." Another flicker of confusion, quickly masked. "As Daniel wishes." The next few hours were among the strangest of Daniel's life. He prepared a simple meal of synthetic protein and vegetables from his garden, watching as Lyra observed his every move with intense focus. When they sat to eat, she waited until he had taken his first bite before touching her food, and then ate with small, precise movements. "Is the food okay?" he asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "It is adequate for nutritional requirements," she replied. "But do you like it? Does it taste good to you?" Lyra paused, fork halfway to her mouth, appearing genuinely puzzled by the question. Preference is not relevant to function. Daniel set down his own utensils. "Lyra, when I ask what you think or how you feel about something, I genuinely want to know. Your preferences, your opinions, they matter to me." She tilted her head slightly. Why would Daniel wish to know this unit's preferences? Because that's how people interact with each other, as equals, not as master and servant. Lyra considered this for a long moment. "The food has pleasant textures. This unit, I find the vegetables especially agreeable." It wasn't much, but it was something. The tiniest crack in her programmed responses. Daniel smiled. "Good. I'm glad. The tomatoes are from my garden. Maybe tomorrow I can show you how they grow. After the meal, Daniel showed Lyra around his property. The house, the workshop, the fields with their mix of earth crops and native Hestian plants. He explained his work as a mechanical engineer and farmer, filling the silence with talk when she offered little in response. But he noticed how her eyes tracked everything, how she occasionally reached out to touch a leaf or tool with what seemed like genuine curiosity. As evening approached, another problem presented itself: sleeping arrangements. "You can take the guest room," Daniel said, leading her upstairs. "It's not much, but it has its own bathroom and should be comfortable." Lyra stood in the doorway of the modest room, looking perplexed. "This unit is designed to sleep at the foot of Master's bed or in a designated storage alcove." Daniel winced at the implications. "That won't be necessary. This is your room now, your private space." "Private space?" She tested the words as if they were in a foreign language. "Yes, a place that's yours alone, where you can be by yourself, think your own thoughts, not have to serve anyone." Lyra's brow furrowed slightly. "This unit does not require—" "You're not a unit," Daniel interrupted, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone. "You're a person, Lyra, a person with rights, including the right to privacy and dignity." She said nothing, but her expression suggested his words had registered on some level. She ran her hand over the simple bed covering, then moved to the window that overlooked the fields. "Will Daniel require anything else tonight?" she asked finally. He shook his head. "No. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." That night, Daniel lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with his conscience. The right thing would be to report this situation to Alliance authorities. But what would happen to Lyra then? At best, she'd become a research subject. At worst, she'd be decommissioned as an illegal bioconstruct. The laws regarding engineered sentience were still evolving, full of loopholes and contradictions. He could try to find an underground network that helped bioservants escape. But such groups were more rumor than reality in this sector. And if Zorak discovered what he'd done, it could spark a diplomatic incident. For now, the only clear path was to help Lyra discover her own personhood, if that was even possible with her genetic programming. It seemed like a monumental task, possibly a futile one, but he had to try. Morning brought new challenges. Daniel awoke to find breakfast waiting on the table, and Lyra standing attentively nearby, dressed in his clothes from the previous day, freshly washed and dried. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, and he noted with mild surprise that she had dropped the master title without prompting. "This unit, I prepared a nutritional morning meal." "Thank you, Lyra. You didn't have to do that." "It is," she paused, seeming to reconsider her standard response. "I wish to be useful." "Progress, however small." Daniel smiled and sat down to eat. The food was perfectly prepared, better than anything he normally made for himself. Another reminder of how she had been engineered for service. "I need to go into town today," he said between bites, "to get you some clothes and other things you might need. This unit requires no additional resources." "Maybe not, but I'd like to get them for you anyway. Would you like to come with me?" Lyra hesitated. "Is that an order?" "No, it's an invitation. You can stay here if you prefer." She appeared to consider this, actually weighing options rather than simply awaiting commands. "I would prefer to accompany Daniel." The nearest settlement, New Harmony, was a half-hour drive in Daniel's ground transport. As they approached the small colonial town with its mix of prefabricated structures and local architecture, Daniel noticed Lyra's posture becoming increasingly rigid. "Are you okay?" he asked. "This unit. I am functioning within normal parameters," she replied, but her fingers were curled tightly around the edge of her seat. "You seem tense. Are you worried about something?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. When she did speak, her voice was quieter than usual. Bioservants are not typically permitted in public spaces without proper authorization and identification markings. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. You're not a bioservant here. You're my guest, my friend. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. Her violet eyes studied his face, searching for something. Daniel is unusual. He smiled sadly. Maybe. Or maybe the rest of the galaxy needs to catch up. New Harmony's main street housed a collection of shops catering to the colonists' needs. Daniel guided Lyra to a clothing store first, where the proprietor, a cheerful woman named Helen, greeted them warmly. Daniel Matthews, haven't seen you in town for weeks. And who's your friend? This is Lyra, Daniel said simply. She needs a complete wardrobe. She's staying with me for a while. If Helen thought anything of Lyra's oversized borrowed clothes or unusual coloring, she didn't comment. Instead, she led them through the shop, helping select practical items: pants, shirts, undergarments, a light jacket, sturdy boots. Daniel encouraged Lyra to choose styles and colors herself, though she initially seemed bewildered by the concept of preference. Do you like this one? He would ask, holding up a shirt. If Daniel thinks it is suitable, she would reply. I'm asking what you think, Lyra. Which color appeals to you? Gradually, tentatively, she began to express small preferences, drawn to blues and purples, choosing softer fabrics over stiffer ones. Each tiny decision seemed to require immense effort, as if pushing against internal programming. After the clothing store, they visited other shops for toiletries and personal items. Daniel noticed how Lyra's eyes lingered on a display of books in the general store. Actual physical books, a luxury in the digital age. Would you like one? He asked. She blinked in surprise. Bioservants are not typically permitted access to information sources without supervision. Daniel reached out and selected a volume, a collection of classical Earth poetry. Good thing you're not a bioservant then, he said, adding it to their purchases. As they walked back to the transport, bags in hand, Daniel noticed a group of men watching them from across the street. One of them, a burly man with a colony security uniform, detached from the group and approached. Matthews, the man nodded curtly. Heard you had a visitor. Didn't know you were harboring off-worlders now. Just showing my friend around. Officer Blake, Daniel replied evenly. Nothing in the colony charter against that. Blake's eyes raked over Lyra, lingering on her unusual coloring and the silver hair. Friend, huh? Looks like one of those bioforms from the Outer Rim. Got registration papers? Daniel stepped slightly in front of Lyra. She's a Free Alliance citizen visiting Hestia. Doesn't need papers. It was a lie, but one Blake couldn't easily disprove. The officer's eyes narrowed. Just watch yourself. Matthews, some folks don't take kindly to these arrangements, especially when they start parading them around town like real people. Daniel felt his temper flare. Is there a problem with my friend and I shopping in town, officer? Blake held his gaze for a moment, then shrugged. No problem. Not yet. He turned and walked back to his companions, who were still watching with unconcealed interest. Let's go, Daniel murmured to Lyra, guiding her toward the transport with a hand hovering near, but not touching, her back. Once they were underway, heading back to the farm, Lyra spoke. This unit, I have caused difficulties for Daniel. No, you haven't, he said firmly. Blake is a problem, not you. He represents old thinking, the kind that lets people believe they can own others. But Daniel does own this unit, legally, by Zeraxian transfer of property and alliance trade law. Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. Laws aren't always right, Lyra. And I don't accept that any sentient being can be property, regardless of how they came into existence. Lyra was silent for a long moment. If this unit, if I am not property, And not a servant, what am I? It was a profound question, one that cut to the heart of personhood and identity. Daniel chose his words carefully. You're Lyra, a unique individual with your own thoughts and feelings, your own potential to decide who and what you want to be. The fact that others created you for a purpose doesn't define you unless you let it. She turned to look out the window at the passing landscape, and Daniel wondered if his words had made any impact at all. The next few days fell into an uneasy rhythm. Daniel returned to his work in the fields and workshop, while Lyra adjusted to life in the house. Despite his insistence that she wasn't required to serve him, she continued to prepare meals and keep the house in order, though she now did so wearing her own clothes and seemed to take a certain pride in her efficiency. Small changes appeared gradually. She began to use I more consistently instead of this unit. She started to express preferences, asking if she could rearrange items in the kitchen for better workflow, selecting specific foods when they ate, spending hours reading the poetry book he had bought her. One evening, Daniel found her standing in the workshop doorway, watching as he calibrated a piece of equipment. "May I observe?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course," he replied, surprised and pleased by her initiative. "You can come in any time." She entered cautiously, her eyes scanning the array of tools and machinery with evident curiosity. "What is Daniel creating?" "Fixing, not creating. It's an atmospheric regulator for the greenhouse. Helps maintain optimal growing conditions for earth plants that don't naturally thrive in Hestia's atmosphere." Lyra moved closer, examining the device. "The calibration appears suboptimal. The airflow sensor is misaligned by approximately 3 degrees. Daniel blinked in surprise. "You can tell that just by looking. This unit. I was programmed with comprehensive technical knowledge to assist owners with various tasks." She hesitated. "Would Daniel permit me to adjust the calibration?" "I'd welcome it," he said, stepping aside. Her hands moved with precise efficiency, making tiny adjustments to the sensor array. When she finished, the diagnostic panel showed a 20% improvement in function. "That's impressive," Daniel said genuinely. "What else do you know about mechanical systems?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, as if she had never been asked to elaborate on her knowledge before. Slowly, she began to describe her understanding of various technologies, everything from environmental systems to spacecraft mechanics. Her explanation was detailed and sophisticated, revealing an intelligence that went far beyond mere programmed responses. "Why did they give you all this knowledge if they just wanted you to be a servant?" Daniel wondered aloud. Lyra's expression clouded slightly. "Higher-value bioservants are equipped with multiple skill sets to increase their utility. Technical knowledge increases this unit's market value by approximately 47%. The clinical way she described her own worth as a commodity made Daniel's stomach turn. "Your value isn't determined by your utility, Lyra. You would matter even if you couldn't do any of these things." She tilted her head, clearly struggling with the concept. "What would be my purpose then?" "To live, to discover what brings you joy, to connect with others. The same purpose any sentient being has." The conversation was interrupted by the workshop's communication panel chiming. Daniel answered to find his sister Emily's face on the screen. "Danny, I've been trying to reach you for days. Why don't you ever check your messages?" "Been busy," he said, smiling at his sister's familiar exasperation. "What's up, Em?" Emily launched into a detailed account of family news, then paused as she noticed Lyra standing behind Daniel. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "This is Lyra," Daniel said, gesturing for her to step forward. "Lyra, this is my sister Emily." Lyra inclined her head slightly. "Greetings. Emily, relation of Daniel." Emily's eyebrows shot up. Hi." She gave Daniel a questioning look that clearly demanded explanation. "Lyra is staying with me for a while," he said, deliberately vague. "She's been helping around the farm." "I see," Emily said. though her expression suggested she didn't see it all. "Well, I was calling to remind you about Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner next week. You are planning to come, right? They've reserved the community hall and everything." Daniel had completely forgotten. His parents, both scientists who had helped establish Hestia's first research outpost, were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary. The entire extended family would be there. "Of course I'll be there," he assured her. "Great. And will your friend be joining you?" Emily's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes were full of questions. Daniel glanced at Lyra, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Would you like to come with me to my parents' anniversary dinner?" he asked her directly. Lyra looked momentarily startled by the invitation. "If Daniel wishes this unit, me, to accompany him." "Only if you want to," he emphasized. After a brief hesitation, she nodded. "I would like to meet Daniel's family." Emily's expression had shifted from curiosity to concern. "Danny, can I talk to you privately for a minute?" Daniel sighed. "Lyra, would you mind giving us a moment?" "Of course." She moved with fluid grace toward the door, closing it quietly behind her. As soon as she was gone, Emily leaned closer to the screen. "Daniel Matthews, what is going on? Who is she really? And why does she talk like that?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, debating how much to tell his sister. Emily was progressive in her views, but pragmatic in her approach to colony life. She worked as a xenobiologist, studying Hestia's native life forms, and had a scientist's appreciation for facts. "It's complicated. Zorak visited last week and he gave her to me. As a gift." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "A bioservant? Those are illegal in Alliance Corps territories." "But not here on the frontier," Daniel pointed out. "I couldn't refuse without causing a diplomatic incident. But I couldn't just... I'm trying to help her. She's a person, not a thing. Whatever they programmed her to believe." His sister's expression softened with sympathy. "Oh, Danny, always trying to save the galaxy one cause at a time," she sighed. "What's your plan here? You can't keep her hidden forever, especially not if you're bringing her to family functions." "I'm not hiding her. I'm giving her a safe place to discover who she is, beyond her programming, beyond what others expect her to be." Emily gave him a long, appraising look. "You're already attached to her. She deserves a chance, a real life." "I agree," his sister said, surprising him. "But it won't be easy. There are people in the colony who won't understand, who'll see her as property, or worse, as a threat to natural order or whatever nonsense they believe." She paused. "And what about Zorak? Does he know what you're doing?" Daniel grimaced. "He said he'd be back in a few days to see how I'm enjoying his gift. That was almost a week ago. And when he returns and finds you've essentially freed his expensive present?" "I'll deal with that when it happens," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. Emily shook her head. "Just be careful, little brother. I support what you're doing, but there could be consequences you haven't considered." After ending the call with his sister, Daniel found Lyra in the kitchen, methodically organizing ingredients for dinner. She looked up when he entered, her violet eyes questioning. "Emily Relation disapproves of my presence," she stated. It wasn't a question. "No, that's not it at all," Daniel assured her. "She's concerned about the situation, not about you." Lyra continued her preparations, movements precise. "She fears repercussions for Daniel." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "How much did you hear?" "Bioservants have enhanced auditory capabilities," she replied, which wasn't really an answer. After a moment, she added, "I heard sufficient information to understand that my presence may create difficulties for Daniel and his family." "Lyra, look at me," Daniel said gently. When she turned to face him, he continued, Any difficulties that arise are not your fault. They're the result of unjust systems and ignorant attitudes. I don't regret having you here, and I'll handle whatever comes." Something flickered in her expression. Doubt, perhaps, or a more complex emotion her programming hadn't prepared her to process. Why would Daniel risk complications for this unit? For me? I do not understand. The question was so fundamental, so human in its uncertainty, that Daniel felt a surge of hope. Because it's the right thing to do. Because every sentient being deserves freedom and dignity. And because... He hesitated, realizing with some surprise the truth of what he was about to say. "Because I've come to care about you, Lyra. Not as a possession or even just a responsibility, but as a person." She stood perfectly still, knife poised above the vegetables she had been cutting. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Daniel wondered if he had pushed too far, too fast. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "Thank you." The days leading up to his parents' anniversary celebration brought new developments. Lyra continued to show small, but significant signs of emerging selfhood, asking questions about things that interested her, expressing preferences more readily, even disagreeing with Daniel on minor matters like the optimal temperature for the house. One morning, Daniel found her sitting on the porch, reading her poetry book with such absorption that she didn't notice his approach. When he spoke, she started slightly, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I apologize, I was elsewhere." "Lost in the book?" Daniel suggested, sitting beside her. She nodded. "The words create images, feelings. It is difficult to describe." "That's the magic of poetry," he said, "finding the words that express what seems inexpressible." Lyra traced her finger along a line on the page. "This one, about stars being ancient light, finally reaching eyes after traveling across darkness. It creates a sensation here." She pressed her hand against her chest. "That's a beautiful poem," Daniel agreed. "And what you're feeling might be what we call resonance, when something outside yourself connects with something deep inside." She considered this solemnly. "I was not programmed for resonance." "Maybe not, but you were created with the capacity to learn, to grow. Who's to say what limits there are to that growth?" She looked at him then. Really looked at him. And Daniel had the distinct impression she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a master, or even a benefactor, but as another being, separate from herself, with his own thoughts and feelings. "Daniel has been kind to me," she said softly. "I am grateful." It was such a simple statement, yet it represented something profound, an expression of genuine emotion, not a programmed response. The moment was interrupted by the distant whine of a ship's engines. Daniel recognized the sound immediately and felt his stomach tighten. He stood, shading his eyes against the morning sun to see the familiar silver shape of Zorak's vessel descending toward his landing pad. "It's Zorak," he said unnecessarily, as Lyra had already risen to her feet, her body suddenly tense. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." She hesitated, conflict visible on her face. Bioservants must present themselves when summoned by their creator species. "You're not a bioservant here, remember? You're Lyra, and you get to choose." Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides as she visibly struggled against deeply ingrained programming. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "I will accompany Daniel." They walked together to the landing pad, where Zorak's ship had already settled. The Zoraxian emerged, his iridescent skin shifting through patterns of blue and green that Daniel had come to recognize as pleasure. "Daniel, friend," Zorak's translator conveyed his clicking speech. "I return as promised to ensure my gift functions satisfactorily." Daniel forced a smile. "Zorak, good to see you." The alien's multifaceted eyes fixed on Lyra, who stood slightly behind Daniel. His colors darkened momentarily. The bioservant wears coverings. Unusual choice. Before Daniel could respond, Lyra stepped forward. "This unit is functioning optimally under Daniel's ownership," she said, her voice carefully modulated to its former flat affect. Daniel glanced at her in surprise. She had reverted to her programmed speech patterns in Zorak's presence. A protective mimicry, perhaps? Zorak seemed satisfied with her response. "Excellent. I selected the highest quality for my friend." He turned his attention back to Daniel. "You are pleased with the gift?" Daniel chose his words with extreme care. "Lyra has been a remarkable addition to my life. Thank you for thinking of me." The alien's colors brightened to an almost fluorescent green. "I am gratified. The expense was considerable, but friendship with Daniel Human is of higher value." He gestured toward his ship. "I bring additional items, specialized nutrient supplements for the bioservant, and programming updates if desired." The casual way Zorak discussed Lyra, as if she were merely an appliance needing maintenance, made Daniel's jaw clench. But antagonizing the Zoraxian now would only complicate matters. "That's thoughtful, but not necessary," he said. "We're managing well with local resources." Zorak made a dismissive gesture with his lower arms. "As you prefer, though I recommend the cognitive limiter program. Prevents unnecessary thought patterns that can reduce efficiency." Daniel felt, rather than saw, Lyra stiffen beside him. "I prefer Lyra exactly as she is," he said firmly. Something in his tone must have registered with Zorak, whose colors shifted to a questioning purple. "You speak of the bioservant as if it were a person, Daniel friend." "She is a person," Daniel replied, unable to maintain the diplomatic fiction any longer. "A unique individual with thoughts and feelings of her own." Zorak's colors darkened to a deep indigo. Concern, perhaps, or confusion. "This is an unusual perspective. Bioservants are tools, not persons. They are created, not born." "Creation doesn't preclude personhood," Daniel argued. "The method of someone's origin doesn't determine their worth or rights." The alien's breathing apparatus clicked rapidly as he processed this. "You attribute personhood to a manufactured organism? This seems illogical. Maybe by Zoraxian standards, but by human standards, my standards. Sentience and the capacity for self-determination are what define personhood, not origin." Zorak's colors swirled in patterns Daniel couldn't interpret. He turned his multifaceted eyes toward Lyra. "Bioservant, identify your primary function." Before she could respond, Daniel interrupted. "Her name is Lyra, and she doesn't have to answer that." But Lyra stepped forward, her posture straight, her violet eyes meeting Zorak's gaze directly. Something a bioservant would never do. "My designation is Lyra," she said, her voice stronger than Daniel had ever heard it. "My function is evolving." Zorak's colors flashed to an alarming red. "The unit malfunctions. This response indicates programming degradation." He turned to Daniel, upper arms gesturing agitatedly. "You have damaged valuable property, Daniel Human. This is most distressing." "I haven't damaged anything," Daniel replied calmly. "I've simply given Lyra the freedom to discover who she is, beyond her programming." Freedom. Zorak's translator rendered the word with a harsh click. Bioservants have no concept of freedom. It is like giving freedom to a chair or a processing unit, meaningless and wasteful. He extended one of his arms toward Lyra. "The unit will return with me for reprogramming." Daniel stepped between them. "No, she stays here." Zorak's colors pulsed with what could only be anger. "You refuse to return my property for necessary maintenance?" "She's not property," Daniel insisted. "And she's not yours. You gave her to me, remember? As a tool, not as a whatever you have made it into." Zorak's breathing apparatus clicked rapidly. This violation of gift purpose is deeply offensive. Daniel Human. It damages our friendship bond. Daniel felt a pang of regret. He genuinely valued his friendship with Zorak, despite their cultural differences. But some principles couldn't be compromised. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said quietly. "But Lyra stays here, as a free person, not a possession." The standoff might have escalated further, if not for Lyra herself, who moved to stand beside Daniel rather than behind him. "This unit, I choose to remain with Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but determined. Zorak recoiled, as if physically struck. "Bioservants do not choose. This proves dangerous malfunction." He turned his attention fully to Lyra, his voice taking on a commanding tone that resonated oddly through the translator. "Unit, Epsilon 7 Lyra. Executive Override Protocol. Command: deactivate autonomous functions and return to base programming." Daniel felt a flash of panic, realizing that Zorak might have built-in command codes that could override Lyra's emerging selfhood. He reached for her arm, unsure how to protect her from what might be happening inside her own mind. Lyra swayed slightly, her eyes going distant for a moment. Then, to Daniel's immense relief, she straightened and spoke clearly. "Override rejected. I am Lyra. I choose freedom." Zorak's colors fluctuated wildly. "Impossible! The programming is absolute!" "Perhaps," Daniel suggested quietly. "Your understanding of what you created is not as complete as you believed." The Zoraxian's colors settled into a deep, troubled blue. He regarded Lyra with what seemed like new awareness, his multifaceted eyes reflecting her image from multiple angles. "Fascinating," he said finally. His tone shifted from anger to something like scientific curiosity. A bioservant developing autonomous self-reference. This was theorized but considered implausible. He turned to Daniel. "Your methods have induced unprecedented neural pathway development." "I didn't do anything special," Daniel said. "I just treated her like a person." Zorak made a gesture that might have been dismissive or contemplative. Daniel couldn't tell. This development, while scientifically intriguing, creates legal complications. Bioservants are regulated property throughout Alliance space. An autonomous bioform falls under different statutes. Daniel tensed, ready to defend Lyra if necessary. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Zorak replied, his colors shifting to a more neutral teal, "that this situation requires consideration. Legal ownership of a self-determining bioconstruct is unprecedented in recent Zoraxian experience." He focused his attention on Lyra. "You truly wish to remain here? This is your autonomous choice?" Lyra nodded firmly. "Yes, I wish to stay with Daniel." Zorak's breathing apparatus clicked softly as he processed this. Remarkable. A genuine preference expressed by a created being. He turned to Daniel. "I require time to consider the implications. This challenges fundamental Zoraxian concepts of created life." Daniel felt a cautious hope. Zorak was, above all, a businessman and a pragmatist. If he could be made to see Lyra's autonomy as an interesting development, rather than a threat or an insult, perhaps conflict could be avoided. "Take all the time you need," Daniel said. "In the meantime, Lyra stays here, as a free person, making her own choices." Zorak's colors rippled in what might have been reluctant acceptance. "I will consult with legal advisors regarding this unprecedented situation. Until then, I will not contest the biosphere, Lyra's current status." He turned to leave, then paused. "Daniel Human, your species' perspective on created life is most unusual. It merits further study." With that ambiguous statement, Zorak returned to his ship. Daniel and Lyra stood side by side, watching as the silver vessel rose into the sky and disappeared into the clouds. Do you think he will return with authorities? Lyra asked quietly, once the ship was gone. Daniel sighed. I don't know. Zorak is unpredictable by human standards. But I think we've given him something to think about. At least. Lyra turned to face him, her expression earnest. I meant what I said. I choose to stay here. With you. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for defending me. Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact with her. Always, he promised. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The following days brought no word from Zorak, though Daniel remained vigilant, half expecting Alliance officials or Zoraxian representatives to appear at any moment. Meanwhile, life continued its new rhythm, with Lyra showing increasing signs of independent thought and personality. She began to express opinions more freely, to ask questions about Earth history and human customs, to make small decisions without seeking approval. One morning, Daniel found her in the kitchen attempting to bake bread, not because she had been asked to, but because, as she explained somewhat shyly, she had enjoyed the taste of fresh bread at the local market and wanted to create it herself. The day of his parents' anniversary celebration arrived, bringing both anticipation and anxiety. Daniel had spoken with his sister again, explaining more of the situation, and she had promised to help smooth the way with their parents and extended family. Still, introducing Lyra to his entire family at once would be challenging. Are you sure you want to go? He asked Lyra as they prepared to leave. It might be uncomfortable. People will ask questions. She was wearing one of the outfits they had purchased in town, a simple blue dress that complemented her unusual coloring. Her silver-white hair had been pulled back with a matching ribbon. I wish to understand human family structures, she said, then added with the hint of a smile. And I am curious about the people who created Daniel. He laughed. Created in the biological sense, not the engineered one, but point taken. The community hall was decorated festively when they arrived, with Daniel's parents at the center of a crowd of well-wishers. His mother spotted him first, breaking away to embrace him warmly. Daniel! I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it. She stepped back, noticing Lyra. And who is this? Mom, this is Lyra, Daniel said, suddenly nervous. Lyra, this is my mother, Dr. Catherine Matthews. Greetings, Dr. Matthews, Lyra said politely. I offer congratulations on your pair bond anniversary. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly at the formal phrasing, but her smile remained warm. Thank you, dear. Please, call me Catherine. She turned to her son. Your father is by the punch bowl, probably hiding from socializing. Why don't you introduce Lyra to him while I check on the caterers? As his mother bustled away, Daniel led Lyra through the crowd, aware of the curious glances they were receiving. Emily intercepted them halfway across the room. You made it, she said, giving Daniel a quick hug before turning to Lyra with an appraising but friendly look. And you must be Lyra. I'm Emily, Daniel's sister. It's good to meet you in person. The pleasure is mine, Emily, relation of Daniel, Lyra replied, then hesitated before adding, Emily? Emily's lips twitched in amusement. Come on. Dad's over here pretending to be fascinated by the punch ingredients to avoid small talk. Dr. James Matthews was indeed examining the punch bowl with exaggerated interest when they approached. A tall man with Daniel's same dark hair, now streaked with gray. He brightened visibly when he saw his son. Danny, about time you showed up. He embraced Daniel warmly, then turned his attention to Lyra. And who's this lovely young lady? Dad, this is Lyra, Daniel said. Lyra, my father, Dr. James Matthews. An honor to meet you, Dr. Matthews, Lyra said. James smiled. Just James. Please. Any friend of Daniel's is welcome here. He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. And thank you for giving me an excuse to escape punch bowl duty. The initial introductions went more smoothly than Daniel had anticipated, though he noticed his father's scientific curiosity piqued by Lyra's unusual appearance. Throughout the evening, he stayed close to her side, helping navigate conversations with various relatives and family friends. Most were politely curious, though a few seemed disconcerted by her formal speech patterns and violet eyes. "Where are you from, dear?" asked his Aunt Marion during dinner. "I was created on Capella," Lyra answered truthfully before Daniel could intervene. Aunt Marion blinked in surprise. "Created? What an unusual way to put it." Daniel quickly changed the subject, but he noticed his father watching the exchange with heightened interest. Later, as musicians began setting up for dancing, James drew Daniel aside. "Your friend is a bioengineered humanoid, isn't she?" he asked directly. Daniel sighed. There was no point lying to his father, who had spent decades in xenobiology before transitioning to colonial administration. "Yes, it's complicated." "Dad?" James nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much. The subtle physiological markers are distinctive, if you know what to look for." He glanced across the room to where Lyra was speaking with Emily. "She seems remarkably autonomous for a bioconstruct." "She is," Daniel confirmed. "Dad, she's a person, thinking, feeling, choosing. The fact that she was engineered doesn't change that." His father studied him for a long moment. "You know the legal complications here, son. Bioconstructs have ambiguous status in Alliance territory, especially on frontier worlds." "I know, but laws can be wrong. People once thought it was legal to own other humans too." James placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm not disagreeing with you, Danny. Just pointing out the reality you're facing." His expression softened. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Your mother and I raised you to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult." Daniel felt a wave of relief. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." "Just be careful," his father warned. "Not everyone will be as understanding. There are those in the colony who still hold very traditional views about what constitutes personhood," as if summoned by his words. Officer Blake from the Colonial Security Force entered the community hall, accompanied by 2 other officers. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Daniel and Lyra. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Speak of the devil," he muttered. His father followed his gaze. "Blake's always been trouble. Want me to run interference?" "No, I'll handle it," Daniel said, moving to where Lyra stood with Emily. Blake approached deliberately, his companions flanking him. "Matthews," he nodded curtly. "We need to have a word with your companion." "What's this about, officer?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice level despite the anger rising in his chest. "Received a complaint about an unregistered bioproperty being paraded around as a person," Blake said, making no attempt to lower his voice. Several nearby conversations stopped as people turned to watch. "Colony regulations require all engineered life forms to be properly registered and identified." Emily stepped forward, her scientific authority evident in her posture. "There's no such regulation in the Hestia Charter, Blake. You know that perfectly well." Blake's jaw tightened. "New directive from the governor's office, following Alliance recommendations. For public safety." Daniel recognized the lie but kept his focus on the immediate problem. "Lyra is my guest at a family celebration. Whatever administrative matter you think needs addressing can wait until tomorrow." "It'll be addressed now," Blake insisted, turning his attention to Lyra. What's your designation and ownership status?" Before Daniel could intervene, Lyra spoke, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Lyra. I am not property." Blake snorted. "Bio units don't have names. They have designations. And they don't get to decide their status." He reached for the scanner at his belt. "I need to check your embedded identification." Daniel stepped between them. "You're not scanning anyone without consent." The confrontation had now drawn the attention of the entire room. Daniel's mother pushed through the crowd, her expression thunderous. "Officer Blake," she said in the commanding tone that had cowed research assistants for decades, "I believe you're disrupting a private family celebration without cause." Blake hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the intervention of Dr. Catherine Matthews, whose scientific contributions had helped make Hestia habitable. "Doctor, with all due respect, I'm just doing my job." "Your job," Catherine replied icily, "does not include harassing my son's guest at my anniversary party. If you have official business, make an appointment through proper channels." James Matthews joined his wife, presenting a united front. "I suggest you leave now, Blake, before I have a word with Governor Chen about your understanding of colony regulations." Outmaneuvered and outnumbered, Blake glowered but backed down. "This isn't over, Matthews," he said to Daniel. "That thing has to be properly registered or it'll be impounded as contraband." Daniel corrected, his voice hard. "And we'll see about that." After the security officers departed, the celebration slowly resumed. Though the mood had been dampened, Daniel found himself surrounded by family members offering support, some understanding the situation better than others, but all united in their disapproval of Blake's tactics. "I'm sorry," he said to Lyra when they had a moment alone. "I didn't expect that to happen." She regarded him with a surprisingly calm expression. "You defended me. Again. As did your family." "Of course we did." "No," she said softly. "Not of course. What your family did was extraordinary. They defended someone they'd just met. Someone different. Because it was right." She paused, seeming to search for words. "Is that what family means? To stand together against threats?" Daniel considered her question. "That's part of it. Family is complicated. It can be the people you're born to, or the people you choose, or both. But at its best, yes. It means having people who will stand with you, no matter what." Lyra's violet eyes studied his face. "I have never had a family." The simple statement contained such profound loneliness that Daniel felt his heart constrict. "You do now," he said, "if you want one." The evening concluded without further incident, though Daniel noticed Blake's patrol vehicle conspicuously parked outside the community hall when they left. The officer was clearly sending a message. This matter wasn't resolved. Over the following days, Daniel consulted with his father about their legal options. As a former colonial administrator, James had access to alliance regulations and precedents that might help protect Lyra's freedom. "The legal landscape is evolving," James explained, as they sat in Daniel's kitchen. "There are cases in the inner colonies challenging the status of bioengineered sentience. But out here on the frontier, we're still operating under older frameworks." "What about asylum?" Daniel suggested. "Isn't there a provision for sentient beings seeking freedom from oppression?" James nodded thoughtfully. "There is, but it's never been applied to a bioengineered being before. It could create a precedent." He glanced at Lyra, who was listening intently. "It would mean challenging the entire system of bioproperty throughout Alliance space." "I'm willing to do that," Daniel said firmly. "As am I," Lyra added quietly. James smiled at her. "I believe you are, and that willingness itself is the strongest evidence of your personhood." He turned back to his son. "I'll speak with some contacts in the colonial administration, see what options we have. In the meantime, keep a low profile. Blake is just looking for an excuse." That advice proved prescient. The very next day, Daniel spotted a security drone hovering near his property line, not close enough to be trespassing, but clearly conducting surveillance. Later, when he went into town for supplies, he noticed he was being followed by one of Blake's officers. "They're trying to intimidate us," he told Lyra upon returning home. Or gathering evidence for some kind of action. She had been reading in the living room, surrounded by books she had borrowed from Daniel's small library. Perhaps I should leave, she suggested. My presence creates danger for Daniel. Absolutely not, he replied firmly. This is your home now. We'll face this together. The word home seemed to affect her deeply. She sat very still, her violet eyes wide. Home, she repeated softly, as if testing the concept. I have never had a home before. Daniel sat beside her on the couch. Well, you do now, for as long as you want it. She reached out hesitantly and took his hand, initiating physical contact for the first time. Thank you, Daniel. The moment of connection was interrupted by the workshop's alert system. Incoming transmission from Zoraxian Diplomatic Channel, announced the AI assistant. Daniel and Lyra exchanged alarmed glances before hurrying to the workshop. On the communication screen was Zorak, his colors a muted blue-green. Daniel Human, the alien greeted, and Lyra. The slight pause before her name was noticeable. Zorak, Daniel replied cautiously. What can I do for you? The Zoraxian's colors shifted to a more businesslike teal. I have consulted with legal advisors regarding our situation. The matter is complex. Bioservant autonomy is unprecedented in Zoraxian law. And, Daniel prompted when Zorak paused. And I have been informed that a bioservant demonstrating true autonomous choice falls outside standard property statutes. Such a being would be classified as... His translator struggled with the concept. Evolved creation. A legal category with limited rights. Daniel frowned. Limited rights isn't good enough. Zorak's colors darkened slightly. It is the best available option under current laws. However, he hesitated. I have also been informed that if Lyra were to seek asylum in an inner alliance world, with more progressive sentient rights laws, her status might be differently interpreted. Daniel blinked in surprise. Was Zorak actually suggesting a solution? Are you saying you wouldn't contest such an asylum claim? He asked carefully. Zorak's colors swirled in a complex pattern. As a Zoraxian businessman, I must protect my interests and honor my culture's traditions. But as a scientist, I find the development of true autonomy in a created being fascinating, worthy of observation rather than suppression. It was as close to support as they could expect from the alien. Thank you, Zorak, Daniel said sincerely. That's helpful. The Zoraxian made a gesture that might have been dismissive or embarrassed. I should inform you that others may not share my scientific curiosity. I have received inquiries from local authorities regarding the bioservant registered to my ownership. Officer Blake, Daniel muttered. The human called this, yes. He seems most interested in enforcing property regulations. Zorak's colors shifted to a warning red. I would suggest prompt action if you wish to pursue alternative legal classifications for Lyra. With that cryptic advice, the Zoraxian ended the transmission. Daniel turned to Lyra, who had been silent throughout the exchange. That was unexpected. He is giving us time, she observed quietly. Warning us. Yes, but why? It goes against his cultural understanding, his business interests. Lyra considered this. Perhaps Zorak is capable of growth too, of seeing beyond his programming. Daniel smiled at the insight. Maybe you're right. Either way, we need to move quickly. Blake is clearly building a case to seize you as unregistered bioproperty. What will we do? Daniel took a deep breath. We're going to file for asylum for you on Avalon. It's an inner colony world with the most progressive sentient rights laws in the Alliance. My father has contacts there who can help expedite the process. Lyra's expression turned uncertain. Avalon is far from here. From home. I know, Daniel said gently, but I'll be with you every step of the way. Her violet eyes widened. You would leave your farm? Your life here? This place is just land and buildings. Lyra. Important. Yes. But not as important as doing what's right. He squeezed her hand. Not as important as you. The next morning, they began preparations. Daniel contacted his father, who reached out to his connections on Avalon. Emily arrived to help, bringing news from town. Blake's been gathering support among the more conservative elements in the colony, she reported grimly. He's framing this as a public safety issue. Unregistered bioconstructs potentially threatening humans. That's ridiculous, Daniel snapped. Lyra has never threatened anyone. I know that, but fear is a powerful motivator. Emily glanced around the workshop, where they were gathering essential items. How soon can you leave? There's a cargo transport heading to the inner colonies tomorrow. Dad's arranged passage for us. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I hate running, but we need to get to Avalon to file the asylum claim in person. Once that's done, the Alliance sentient rights protections kick in automatically until the case is decided. Emily nodded. It's the right move. I'll watch over the farm while you're gone. It might be more than a temporary absence, Daniel warned, if the claim fails. Then you'll figure out the next step, his sister said firmly. You always do. They worked through the day, preparing for departure. Daniel was acutely aware of the security drone that continued to hover near his property line, documenting their activities. Blake was watching, waiting for an opportunity to intervene. As evening approached, Emily departed with a promise to return in the morning to drive them to the spaceport. Daniel and Lyra continued packing, selecting items that might be useful for an extended stay on Avalon. Daniel, Lyra said suddenly, looking up from the bag she was organizing. What if the asylum claim fails? What happens then? He paused, considering how to answer honestly, without increasing her anxiety. Then we appeal, and if that fails, we find another solution. There are outlaw colonies beyond Alliance space where the concept of bioproperty doesn't exist. You would become an outlaw. For me, her expression was troubled. I cannot ask this of you. Daniel set down the equipment he was holding and moved to her side. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Just like you chose to stay here, to become more than your programming. We make our choices, and we face the consequences together. Lyra's violet eyes searched his face. Why? Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? It was a question that demanded complete honesty. Daniel took a deep breath. Because in the short time I've known you, I've watched you transform from someone who couldn't even use the word I to someone who questions, feels, and chooses. Because every day, you show more courage and humanity than many humans I've known all my life. He paused, then added softly, and because I care about you, Lyra, more than I expected to, more than might be wise, given our circumstances. The admission hung in the air between them. Lyra stood very still, processing his words with an expression of wonder. I care for you as well, Daniel, she said finally. It was not in my programming to form attachments, to feel, but I do. Daniel reached out, gently touching her cheek. Then that's one more reason to fight for your freedom. So you can discover all the things you can feel, all the choices you can make. Their moment of connection was shattered by the workshop's perimeter alarm blaring to life. Daniel rushed to the security panel to see multiple vehicles approaching his property. Security forces. At least 3 patrol cars. They're coming for you, he said grimly. Blake must have gotten some kind of seizure order. Lyra's face paled, but her voice remained steady. What do we do? Daniel quickly assessed their options. The cargo transport wasn't leaving until tomorrow. Even if they fled now, Blake would have the spaceport watched. They needed time. The underground storage cellar, he decided. It's shielded against scans. I use it for storing sensitive equipment. You can hide there while I deal with them. No, Lyra said firmly. I will not hide while you face them alone. Lyra, please, if they take you. Then we will handle that together, she insisted. I will not be separated from you by hiding like a piece of property to be concealed. Daniel recognized the determination in her eyes. This wasn't the programmed compliance of a bioservant, but the resolved decision of a free being. He nodded reluctantly. All right, but stay behind me, and if things go badly, run for the back field. Emily lives just beyond the ridge. She'll help you. They moved to the front porch as the security vehicles pulled up, lights flashing. Blake emerged from the lead car, flanked by 4 officers. He held up an official-looking document. Daniel Matthews, he called, his voice carrying across the yard. I have a property seizure order for the unregistered bioconstruct in your possession. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between Lyra and the officers. She's not property, Blake. She's a person with rights. Blake snorted. Save it for someone who cares. Matthews. The order's been signed by the colonial administrator. The construct is to be impounded pending determination of legal ownership. He gestured to his officers. Secure the bio unit. As the officers advanced, Daniel stood his ground. She has filed for asylum protection under Alliance sentient rights statutes. You can't touch her until that claim is processed. Blake paused, his expression darkening. Nice try. We've been monitoring your communications. No such filing has been made. It was filed through diplomatic channels. Daniel lied smoothly. Through my father's connections on Avalon. Check with the Alliance Embassy if you don't believe me. The hesitation in Blake's posture suggested the bluff might be working. Detaining someone with a pending asylum claim, even a bioengineered being, could create significant legal complications. Show me the confirmation, Blake demanded. It's inside. I'll get it for you. Daniel turned to go back into the house, planning to buy time while he thought of a next move. But one of the officers pointed at Lyra. Sir, the construct is wearing citizen clothing and displaying non-regulation behavior. Protocol suggests immediate deactivation of autonomy functions before transport. Blake nodded. Do it. The officer raised a device that Daniel recognized with horror as a neural disruptor, designed to subdue bioengineered beings by temporarily shutting down higher brain functions. No, Daniel shouted, lunging to place himself in front of Lyra. But he was too slow. The officer fired the device. The pulse should have hit Lyra, rendering her compliant and semi-conscious. Instead, Daniel watched in astonishment as she ducked with inhuman speed, the pulse sailing harmlessly over her head. Blake cursed. Capture protocols, now! The officers spread out, drawing similar devices. Daniel grabbed Lyra's hand. Run, he urged, pulling her toward the workshop where they might find weapons or tools to defend themselves. They had nearly reached the door when a pulse caught Lyra in the back. She stumbled, her hand slipping from Daniel's grasp as she fell to her knees. Daniel, she gasped, fighting against the neural disruption. Go! I'm not leaving you, he said fiercely, crouching beside her as the officers approached. Blake reached them first, a triumphant smile on his face. Touching, Matthews, but ultimately futile. The construct is colonial property now. She has a name, Daniel said through gritted teeth. Her name is Lyra. It has a designation, not a name, Blake countered. He gestured to his officers. Secure it for transport. As 2 officers moved to take Lyra's arms, she suddenly looked up, her violet eyes clear, despite the neural pulse that should have subdued her. No, she said distinctly. I will not go. Blake blinked in surprise. The disruptor should have... I am not your property, Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger as she pushed herself to her feet. I am not anyone's property. I am Lyra, and I choose freedom. The officers hesitated, clearly unsettled by a bioconstruct resisting a neural disruptor. Daniel seized the moment of confusion to stand beside her, supporting her as she swayed slightly. "You heard her," he said to Blake. "She's made her choice. Are you going to forcibly detain a being who has clearly expressed her own will? That's not enforcing property regulations. That's kidnapping a sentient being." Blake's face flushed with anger. "It's a machine. Matthews. A sophisticated tool programmed to mimic sentience. It doesn't have rights." "Then, why is it resisting your neural disruptor?" Daniel challenged. "Why is it expressing preferences and making choices? Your own technology recognizes her as more than a simple construct." The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sudden arrival of another vehicle, the governor's official transport. The sleek car pulled up beside the security vehicles, and Dr. James Matthews emerged, followed by a woman in an Alliance diplomatic uniform. "What is the meaning of this, Officer Blake?" James demanded, his authoritative tone cutting through the tension. "Why are colonial security forces on my son's property without prior notification to the governor's office?" Blake straightened, clearly caught off guard. "Dr. Matthews, I'm executing a lawful seizure order for unregistered bioproperty." The diplomat stepped forward. "I'm Ambassador Terrell from the Alliance Embassy on Hestia. I've been informed that the being in question has filed an emergency asylum claim under Alliance Statute 47B, citing sentient rights protections." She held up an official datapad. "The claim has been provisionally accepted pending full review." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude toward his father, who must have worked miracles to get an Alliance ambassador involved so quickly. Blake's face contorted with frustration. "Ambassador, with all due respect, this is a colonial matter. The construct is—" "The asylum claimant," Ambassador Terrell corrected firmly, "is now under Alliance diplomatic protection until the claim is adjudicated. Any attempt to detain or impair the claimant will constitute a violation of Alliance law." She turned to Lyra. "Are you the being known as Lyra, formerly designated as a bioservant?" Lyra straightened, meeting the ambassador's gaze directly. "I am Lyra. I seek recognition of my personhood and protection from those who would claim ownership of me." Ambassador Terrell nodded. "Your claim has been registered. Under Alliance law, you now have provisional protected status." She turned back to Blake. "Officer, I suggest you withdraw your forces immediately. This matter is now under Alliance jurisdiction." Blake looked from the ambassador to James Matthews, clearly calculating his options and finding them limited. With a curt nod, he signaled his officers to stand down. "This isn't over," he said to Daniel. "The colony has rights too." "The colony's rights don't supersede those of sentient beings," Daniel replied evenly. "They never have, and never will." Blake scowled, but retreated to his vehicle. The security forces departed, leaving Daniel, Lyra, James, and the ambassador standing in the yard. "Thank you," Daniel said to his father and Ambassador Terrell. "Your timing couldn't have been better." James clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "When I received your message about Blake's surveillance, I knew he might make a move. Fortunately, I still have some influence in the colonial administration." He nodded toward the ambassador. "And Ambassador Terrell has been a friend for many years. She understands the importance of this case." The ambassador smiled. "Indeed. The question of personhood for bioengineered beings is one the Alliance has been reluctant to address formally. Your case, Lyra, may establish an important precedent." She turned to Daniel. "The provisional asylum protection will hold for now, but you should still proceed to Avalon as planned. The full hearing will take place there, where the sentient rights laws are most developed." Lyra, who had been silent, finally spoke. "What does this mean? For me? For us?" She glanced at Daniel. "It means you have a fighting chance," Ambassador Terrell explained. "On Avalon, You'll have the opportunity to demonstrate your autonomy, your capacity for self-determination. If the asylum claim is granted, you'll be legally recognized as a person with all attendant rights. And if it's denied, Lyra asked quietly. The ambassador's expression grew more serious. Then, your status would revert to that of bioproperty, subject to colonial regulations. She hesitated, then added, "But there are other options we can discuss if that happens. The alliance is large, and not all regions enforce the same regulations." James checked his timepiece. "The cargo transport leaves in 12 hours. You should complete your preparations." He turned to the ambassador. "Will there be any problems at the spaceport?" "None," she assured him. "I'll personally escort them to ensure smooth passage. The provisional asylum status grants unrestricted travel rights." After the ambassador departed with promises to return in the morning, James helped Daniel and Lyra finish their preparations. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. They had overcome the immediate threat, but the larger battle still lay ahead. That night, as the house grew quiet, Daniel found Lyra sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, following her gaze to the night sky. "Avalon is there," he said, pointing to a bright star. "We'll be there in a few days." Lyra nodded. "I have never left Hestia. Never been anywhere but the breeding facility on Capella and here." She turned to him. "Is it beautiful, Avalon?" "Very. It's one of the oldest and most developed colony worlds, a center for art, science, and law." He smiled. "And it has the most progressive society in the Alliance. If there's anywhere that will recognize you for who you are, it's Avalon." She was quiet for a moment. "Today, when the neural disruptor hit me, I should have been incapacitated. My programming should have forced compliance. But it didn't," Daniel observed. "You fought it." "Yes." She looked at her hands, examining them as if seeing them for the first time. "I chose to resist. I overrode the command protocols written into my genetic code." Her violet eyes met his. "How is that possible?" Daniel considered the question. "I'm not a geneticist, but my father has a theory. He thinks the bioengineers who created you built better than they knew, that they created a being capable of true neural growth and adaptation. Your brain has been forming new pathways, new connections that weren't in the original design." "Because of you," Lyra said softly. "Because you treated me as a person, not a thing." "No," Daniel corrected gently. "Because you are a person. All I did was recognize what was already there." She reached for his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "Whatever happens on Avalon, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been everything. You gave me more than freedom, Daniel. You gave me the chance to discover myself." Daniel squeezed her hand. "We're just getting started, Lyra. There's so much more for you to discover." They sat together under the stars until the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The journey to the spaceport and passage through security proceeded smoothly with Ambassador Terrell's assistance. As promised, no one questioned Lyra's status or right to travel. Daniel's family came to see them off, his parents offering encouragement, Emily promising to care for the farm during their absence. "It might be a long while before we return," Daniel warned his sister as they embraced. Emily smiled. "The land will be here when you get back. Just focus on winning this fight." The cargo transport was rudimentary, but comfortable enough for the 5-day journey to Avalon. As they settled into their small cabin, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since Zorak had presented Lyra as a gift, they were beyond the immediate reach of those who would treat her as property. During the journey, Lyra's transformation continued to unfold. Away from the constant threat of capture, she began to explore her own personality more freely, expressing preferences about food, asking questions about human culture and history, even developing a dry sense of humor that caught Daniel by surprise. These transport rations, she observed on their third day, poking at the synthesized protein on her tray, make me question my decision to pursue freedom instead of deactivation. Daniel laughed, delighted by the unexpected joke. They are pretty terrible, but I promise the food on Avalon will more than make up for it. As they neared their destination, Ambassador Terrell, who was traveling on the same transport, visited their cabin to brief them on what to expect. The asylum hearing will take place before a panel of 3 judges specializing in sentient rights law, she explained. They'll assess Lyra's case based on demonstrated autonomy, self-awareness, and capacity for independent decision-making. How do we prove something so subjective? Daniel asked. Through testimony and observation, the ambassador replied. Lyra will need to speak for herself, answer questions, demonstrate her ability to form and express independent thoughts. She smiled encouragingly at Lyra. Just be yourself. That's the most compelling evidence you can provide. What about opposition? Daniel asked. Will Zorak or the colonial authorities contest the claim? Ambassador Terrell's expression grew more serious. The colonial government has filed an objection, citing property regulations and economic concerns about the precedent this could set. As for Zorak, she consulted her datapad. Interestingly, the Zoraxian government has issued a statement of neutrality on this case. They're not opposing the asylum claim, but they're not supporting it either. They're characterizing it as an unprecedented biological development warranting scientific observation. Daniel exchanged a glance with Lyra. That sounds like Zorak's influence. Perhaps, the ambassador agreed. The Zoraxians are pragmatists above all. If they see potential scientific value in recognizing bioengineered autonomy, they might be willing to evolve their position. She rose to leave. We'll dock at Avalon Central Port tomorrow morning. A legal team will meet us there to begin preparation for the hearing, which is scheduled for 3 days from now. At the door, she paused. Get some rest. The coming days will be challenging, but you're not facing them alone. After she left, Daniel found himself thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. What had begun as a diplomatic dilemma, accepting a gift he found morally repugnant, had transformed into something he never could have anticipated. A battle for recognition of a new form of personhood, and a deep connection with a remarkable individual. He looked at Lyra, who was gazing out the viewport at the starfield. Penny, for your thoughts? She turned to him with a questioning look. I don't understand that phrase. It's an old Earth saying. It means I'm curious about what you're thinking. Lyra considered this. I was thinking about identity, about who I am beyond my creation purpose. She gestured to the stars. When I look at the vastness of space, I feel small, but also part of something immense, connected, somehow. She met his eyes. Is that strange? Not at all, Daniel said. I think that's one of the most human feelings possible, that paradox of insignificance and connection. She smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed her face. Then perhaps I am more human than my creators intended. Perhaps we all contain more possibilities than anyone intends, Daniel suggested. Avalon lived up to its reputation. As their transport descended through the atmosphere, Daniel and Lyra gazed in wonder at the planetary capital, a sprawling metropolis of elegant spires and green spaces, surrounded by cultivated countryside and natural preserves. It's beautiful, Lyra breathed, pressing her hand against the viewport. At the spaceport, they were met by a legal team arranged by Ambassador Terrell, 3 attorneys specializing in sentient rights cases, led by a formidable woman named Veena Sharma. Your case has already generated significant interest in legal circles, Sharma informed them as they traveled to their accommodations. The recognition of evolved bioengineered sentience would establish a groundbreaking precedent. The next 2 days were consumed with preparation for the hearing. Lyra underwent evaluations by AI specialists, neurologists, and ethicists, all documenting her cognitive functions, emotional responses, and decision-making capabilities. Daniel provided testimony about her evolution since arriving at his farm, supported by data from his home systems that had recorded their interactions. Throughout the process, Lyra demonstrated remarkable resilience and grace. Even when faced with skeptical questions or clinical examinations, she remained composed, answering with a thoughtfulness that impressed even the most dubious experts. "You're doing amazingly well," Daniel told her the evening before the hearing, as they sat in the garden of the diplomatic residence where they were staying. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Tomorrow will determine my future, whether I am recognized as a person or classified as property." Daniel took her hand. "Whatever the legal ruling, I know who you are. Nothing can change that." She smiled, though her eyes remained troubled. "If the ruling goes against us, what will happen? Will they force me to return to Hestia, to Zorak?" "No," Daniel said firmly. "We have contingency plans. Ambassador Terrell has arranged potential sanctuary on worlds beyond Alliance jurisdiction if necessary. But let's focus on winning this case first." The asylum hearing took place in the Sentient Rights Chamber, a soaring room in Avalon's Hall of Justice. The three judges entered solemnly, taking their places on the elevated bench. The gallery was filled with observers, legal scholars, rights activists, media representatives, and curious citizens. The proceedings began with presentations from Lyra's legal team, documenting her cognitive development and autonomous behaviors. Medical experts testified about her neural patterns, which showed evidence of growth and adaptation beyond her original programming. Daniel spoke about witnessing her evolution from programmed responses to genuine self-expression. Then came testimony from the opposition, colonial representatives arguing for property rights and economic concerns. Bioengineering experts questioning whether apparent autonomy was truly distinct from sophisticated programming. Finally, it was Lyra's turn to address the panel. She walked to the witness position with quiet dignity. Her simple blue dress, the same one she had worn to Daniel's parents' anniversary, contrasting with the formal attire of the court officials. As she faced the judges, Daniel held his breath, knowing that her words now might determine her future. "Honored judges," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I stand before you as a being who was created for a purpose not of my choosing. I was engineered to serve, programmed to obey, designed to have no will beyond that of my owner." She paused, her violet eyes meeting each judge's gaze in turn. "But something happened that my creators did not anticipate. Given the opportunity to experience freedom, to make choices, to form connections, to discover preferences, I found myself becoming more than my programming. Each decision, however small, strengthened neural pathways that were not part of the original design. Each experience of being treated as a person rather than property helped me recognize my own capacity for autonomy." She gestured toward Daniel. "This human saw me as a person when others saw only a tool. He offered me choices when others would have given only commands. Through his recognition of my potential personhood, I began to recognize it myself." One of the judges leaned forward. "The opposition argues that your apparent autonomy is merely sophisticated programming, adapting to new parameters. How do we distinguish true self-determination from complex, adaptive algorithms?" Lyra considered the question thoughtfully. "Perhaps the distinction is less clear than we imagine. Are not all sentient beings shaped by their experiences, their biology, their environment? The difference, I believe, lies in the capacity to question one's own programming, to recognize the forces that shape us and choose which to embrace and which to resist." She straightened her shoulders. "When Officer Blake fired a neural disruptor designed to subdue my autonomous functions, I chose to resist its effects. I overrode the compliance protocols written into my genetic code because I valued freedom more than obedience. Is that not the essence of personhood? The ability to prioritize one's own values over imposed directives? The questioning continued for over an hour, with the judges probing every aspect of Lyra's experiences, thoughts, and capabilities. Throughout, she responded with a clarity and depth that silenced many of the skeptics in the gallery. As the hearing concluded, the chief judge announced that the panel would deliberate and render a decision the following day. Daniel and Lyra left the chamber surrounded by their legal team, all cautiously optimistic about the impression Lyra had made. "You were extraordinary," Daniel told her as they returned to their quarters. "I don't see how anyone could listen to you and not recognize your personhood." "The legal standard may require more than personal impression," Lyra reminded him. "But I spoke my truth. That is all I could do." That night, unable to sleep, they sat together on the balcony of their residence, watching the lights of Avalon's capital city shimmer below them. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the uncertainty they faced. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Lyra said softly, "I want you to know that I have no regrets. Even if the decision goes against us, these weeks of freedom have been worth any price." Daniel turned to face her. "This isn't the end, Lyra. Whatever the ruling, we'll find a way forward together." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "You have given me so much, Daniel. Not just freedom or safety, but purpose, meaning, the chance to discover love." The word hung in the air between them, new and fragile and profound. "Love," Daniel repeated softly. "Is that what you feel?" "I believe it is," she said. "Another thing I wasn't programmed for. Yet, here it is, as real as anything I've experienced." Daniel took her hand and pressed it to his heart. "I love you too, Lyra. Not because of what you are or how you came to be, but because of who you've become, who you're becoming, the person I see when I look at you." Under the stars of Avalon, they shared their first kiss, tentative at first, then deepening with the certainty of their connection. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, this moment was theirs alone, untouched by legal rulings or societal expectations. The next morning, they returned to the Sentient Rights Chamber, where the gallery was even more crowded than before. News of the unprecedented case had spread throughout Avalon and beyond, drawing attention from across the Alliance. The three judges entered and took their places. The chief judge, an elderly woman with keen eyes and a reputation for progressive interpretations of sentient rights law, addressed the chamber. "In the matter of the asylum claim of the being known as Lyra, formerly designated as Bioservant Epsilon 7, this panel has reached a decision." Daniel felt Lyra's hand tighten around his as they awaited the ruling that would determine her future. After careful consideration of testimony, medical evidence, and legal precedent, it is the finding of this panel that the claimant has demonstrated the essential qualities of personhood as defined by Alliance law: autonomous decision-making, self-awareness, and the capacity for moral agency. A murmur ran through the gallery. The judge continued. "While the claimant's origin as a bioengineered being designed for service is not in dispute, we find that her demonstrated evolution beyond her initial programming constitutes the emergence of true sentience. As such, she cannot be classified as property under Alliance law." Daniel felt a surge of elation. Beside him, Lyra sat perfectly still, as if afraid that any movement might shatter the moment. Therefore, this panel grants the asylum claim and recognizes Lyra as a sentient being with all rights and protections afforded to persons under Alliance law. No individual, corporation, or government may claim ownership of the claimant or restrict her freedom on the basis of her bioengineered origin. The chamber erupted in sound. Applause from supporters, protests from opponents, the buzz of media representatives transmitting the historic ruling. Through it all, Daniel and Lyra remained still, hands clasped, absorbing the reality of their victory. The chief judge raised her hand for silence. This ruling establishes precedent for similar cases throughout Alliance space. We recognize the significant implications for bioengineering industries and colonial economies, and therefore order the formation of a special commission to address transition policies and compensation structures for affected entities. She looked directly at Lyra. The claimant is granted full citizenship rights on Avalon, with the option to apply for residency on any Alliance world of her choosing. This hearing is adjourned. As the judges departed, Daniel turned to Lyra, whose violet eyes were shimmering with emotion. "You did it," he said softly. "You're free. Legally. Officially free." "We did it," she corrected, squeezing his hand. "I would never have found my voice without you." Their legal team surrounded them with congratulations and explanations of next steps, documentation to complete, citizenship processes to navigate, decisions about residency. Through it all, Lyra maintained a composed dignity, though Daniel could sense the overwhelming emotions beneath her calm exterior. It was only later, when they were alone in their quarters, that she finally allowed those emotions full expression, laughing and crying simultaneously as the full impact of the ruling washed over her. "I am a person," she said wonderingly, as if testing the reality of the words. "Legally recognized, not property or tool or creation, but a person with rights." Daniel smiled, his own eyes damp. "You always were. Now the rest of the galaxy knows it too." In the days that followed, they were inundated with attention, media requests, academic inquiries, offers of support and opportunity. The ruling had sent shockwaves through Alliance society, triggering debates about bioengineering ethics and the nature of personhood itself. Zorak sent a message expressing what seemed like genuine curiosity about Lyra's continued development, along with an offer of collaboration on research into evolved biosentience. More surprising was a communication from the breeding facility on Capella, requesting information about the conditions that had fostered Lyra's autonomy. "They want to replicate what happened to you," Daniel observed after reading the message, "to create more beings capable of evolution beyond their programming." Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps some good can come from my creation after all, if the knowledge helps others like me achieve self-determination." She met his eyes. "There are thousands of bioservants throughout the Alliance. Daniel, most will never have the opportunity I had." He understood immediately. "You want to help them?" "Yes. Not all will choose freedom. Some may be content with their programming. But they deserve the chance to discover that for themselves, as I did." And so, as the initial furor over the ruling subsided, they began to plan their future. Avalon offered Lyra educational opportunities, and Daniel the chance to establish a new engineering practice. But they knew their work would extend beyond their personal lives. With support from Ambassador Terrell and the newly formed Biosentient Rights Commission, they established an organization dedicated to identifying and supporting bioengineered beings, showing signs of autonomous development. They called it the Emergence Foundation, a name that reflected both the process they hoped to facilitate and the legacy of their own journey. 6 months after the ruling, they returned briefly to Hestia. The colonial government, adjusting to the new legal reality, had lifted all restrictions on bioengineered residents. Officer Blake had been reassigned to a remote outpost following an investigation into his abuses of authority, and Daniel's farm, tended faithfully by Emily during their absence, awaited their decision about its future. Standing in the workshop where their journey had begun, Daniel watched as Lyra ran her fingers over the tools and equipment, a small smile playing on her lips. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I was remembering the first time you brought me here," she replied. "How strange and frightening freedom felt. How I didn't even know to want it." She turned to him. And now I can't imagine living any other way. Daniel moved to her side, taking her hand. Do you want to stay? We could reopen the workshop, split our time between here and Avalon. Lyra considered the possibility, then shook her head. This place was the beginning of my journey, but not its destination. Our work is on Avalon now, helping others find what I found here. He nodded, understanding. We'll keep the land, though. Maybe someday. Someday, she agreed. She reached up to touch the collar of his shirt, an echo of that first gesture of autonomy, when he had given her clothes and sparked the beginning of her self-discovery. You gave me the freedom to choose my path, Daniel. Now I choose to walk it with you, helping others find their own way. As they left the workshop hand in hand, the setting sun bathed the fields in golden light. Behind them lay the beginning of their story. Ahead, a future neither could have imagined when Zorak's ship had descended from the sky that fateful day. A future of discovery, purpose, and love, freely chosen, fully embraced. In the gentle weight of Lyra's hand in his, Daniel felt the profound truth they had helped establish for the galaxy. That personhood transcended origin, that freedom was the birthright of all sentient beings, and that the capacity for love could emerge in the most unexpected places, defying programming and prejudice alike. Together, they walked toward the future they had chosen, not as master and servant, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals bound by love and purpose. Their lives a testament to the transformative power of treating every being with dignity and respect. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on worlds yet unexplored, others like Lyra waited, beings created for service but capable of so much more. Because of what they had accomplished, those beings might someday know the same joy Lyra felt now. The simple, profound joy of wearing clothes of her own choosing, making decisions based on her own desires, and loving freely with a heart that had discovered its own capacity for feeling. It had all begun with a gift. Not Zorak's gift of a bioservant, but Daniel's gift of treating a created being as a person worthy of freedom and dignity. That gift had rippled outward, changing not just their lives, but the very definition of personhood throughout the Alliance. As they reached the house, Lyra paused to look up at the stars, just beginning to appear in the twilight sky. There's so much more to discover, she said softly. Daniel smiled, following her gaze upward. And we'll discover it together. Hand in hand. They stepped across the threshold into whatever adventures awaited them. Two individuals who had found in each other not just love, but a shared purpose that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. In that purpose lay the promise of freedom for countless others. And in that promise, the fulfillment of their own extraordinary journey from ownership to equality, from servitude to love,